From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew.
Tonight, a 2-hour call and the promise of immediate ceasefire talks.
We just spent 2.5 hours talking to Vladimir Putin, and I think some progress has been made. It's a terrible situation going on over there. 5,000 young people every single week are being killed.
The response to President Trump's high-stakes call with Vladimir Putin as he seeks to broker a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine after repeatedly calling on Putin to stop Moscow's bombardment. We'll have the details ahead.
Plus, context and analysis from today's market as stocks and bonds eke out gains after reversing early losses following Moody's downgrade on Friday.
And the House Budget Committee advances Trump's long-promised tax bill in a late-night vote, but just barely.
The ayes have it. The motion's agreed to. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act is ordered, reported favorably to the House of Representatives with a favorable recommendation.
The next steps in the fight to get that so-called Big Beautiful Bill done, and why 4 conservatives who initially blocked it could still take its chances when we speak with one of them, Republican Congressman Andrew Clyde, coming up.
And we'll get a look at how Democrats are responding when Congressman Jim Clyburn joins us as the party goes on the attack against the bill.
The Republicans are trying to jam this big, ugly bill down the throats of the American people.
But we begin tonight with the fast-developing story from Capitol Hill after the House Budget Committee narrowly voted to advance the One Big Beautiful Bill Act last night, bringing the Republicans' tax, border, and spending bill one step closer to the full House for approval. The 4 Republicans who had voted no on Friday changing their vote to present to move the bill forward in a 17-16 vote. But Speaker Johnson still has the Rules Committee and a few intra-party problems to work out before the bill can get to the floor. And he can lose no more than 3 Republican votes with a razor-thin majority in the House.
This is where we start now. How does the Speaker get out of these tight jams? What type of pressure was put on, if any, those 4 Budget Committee conservatives to have them change their votes to present? Joining us now is one of those lawmakers, as we mentioned, Republican Congressman Andrew Clyde of Georgia, with us now from Capitol Hill. Congressman, it's great to have you with us. You were a no vote on Friday, as you explained in committee. You said you look forward to strengthening this bill so it does pass. So what made you change your vote to present?
Well, we negotiated over the weekend. I was here all Friday, all Saturday, all Sunday until the evening, and we were negotiating with the Speaker's team, with the White House. I think, got some great conservative wins, and as a result, I was able to change my vote from a no to a present so that we could move this bill forward. Look, I support President Trump's agenda. I support what he's trying to do here. Nobody wants to see taxes raised on the American people. I certainly don't, but we've got to do this in a fiscally responsible way that does not increase deficits year over year, but actually decreases deficits. And that's the whole point right here. Our country's in a financial situation that is very dire, and I don't want to see it go off the fiscal cliff into the abyss.
Well, Congressman, it's one thing to be moved from no to present. It's another to be moved to yes. What does the Speaker still need to deliver to you to make sure you are a yes vote if this gets to the House floor?
Well, we've got some work to do on Medicaid yet. You know, I think it's not right when the federal government pays more for able-bodied, non-working adults to take care of their medical concerns than it does for those in the most vulnerable population. That would be the disabled, the moms with small children, the elderly, that vulnerable population right there. The federal government is only spending $1.33 for every dollar that the state puts in, yet for able-bodied non-working, we're putting in $9 for every dollar that the state puts in. That's 7 times more for able-bodied non-working. I'm sorry, but those folks need to be working. And so one of the things that we managed to achieve was an increase in the working requirements in this particular bill. I mean, right now, the bill as it's written has working requirements not starting until 2029. That's unconscionable. That's like saying, hey, get a job, but you got 4 years to do it. where we need to have those regulations written immediately, and we need to have those work requirements moved up until next year.
Well, you've got a lot of eyes on you right now, Congressman. You can't read a column or hear a story about what's happening right now with some Republican upset about reconciliation without bumping into your name. What's it like having this kind of heat? Is your phone ringing off the hook from constituents? Have you heard from Donald Trump?
Actually, we've gotten a lot of support because the thing is this. I came to Washington, D.C. to make our country more fiscally responsible. You know, in our everyday lives, we've got to be responsible. We all have budgets. We've got to stay within those budgets, stay within those spendings. Businesses understand that, too. The federal government needs to understand that. I'm a small businessman. I understand what it's like to spend only within your means. The federal government has to get there, too. You know, the president wants a balanced budget. So we are working very hard to get us to the point of moving us to a balanced budget. It's going to be a while to do that, but this bill is a critical opportunity in which to move us toward a balanced budget.
Well, and when we consider the spending cuts you were just alluding to, Congressman, going back to the federal Medicaid assistance percentage question, you answered that in response to me saying, what does the speaker still need to deliver? Should it be our understanding that leadership has not made a formal offer on FMAP specifically?
Well, I think as the speaker said earlier, everything is still in flux. Everything is still negotiable, and nothing has been firmly committed to. So we're in that process. We have a little more time. You know, Congress works on deadlines, and unfortunately, you know, I like to get things done early. That's not necessarily the way it happens here in Congress. But, you know, we've got to negotiate to a point where the budget itself is either budget neutral or it reduces the deficit, not increasing the deficit, and we're not quite there yet.
You know, Congressman, it wasn't too long after your budget committee hearing on Friday that Moody's announced its decision to downgrade U.S. debt, arguing much like yourself over the impact on debt and deficits in the many years that we've been having this conversation. This obviously is something that's important to us, to our audience, and to the markets. Was that downgrade deserved?
Well, I think that just shows how right we are. That adds credence to our argument. You know, that downgrade has to do with the fact that Congress for many, many years has not been controlling spending. We have a $2 trillion deficit every solitary year. And Moody's is like, all right, well, if you're going to go out and sell more debt, then you need to be more fiscally responsible, or we're going to give you a downgrade. And as a result, Moody's gave us a downgrade from AAA to AA1, and that means we're going to have higher interest rates. That means the interest expense, which is a mandatory expense in the federal government, is going to go up. If we're going to issue new bonds and pay off the maturing bonds at the lower interest rate of about 1%, we now have to offer 4% or more now with this downgrade. So the interest cost is simply going to spiral upwards. That is unsustainable, and we've got to stop that. And that's why we're fighting so hard for fiscal responsibility in this particular once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-a-generation opportunity.
Do we risk, though, Congressman, that fight for fiscal responsibility, knowing that a lift to the debt ceiling is embedded in this package, running us too close to the X date and putting even more question into the full faith and credit of the United States?
Well, I think that's another part of this particular bill. You know, if we can do it only with Republican votes, we can work on that debt ceiling as responsibly as possible with the smallest number of add-ons and requirements. That way, the Democrats get nothing for the increase of this debt ceiling, and we can do it all with Republican votes. I think it's being done in the most fiscally responsible way possible.
That would require this timeline to hold, though, Congressman. Speaker Johnson wants a floor vote before this week is out. Will he get one?
I don't know. That's a great question. I'm one person, and I will work very hard to ensure that the president's agenda is fulfilled as much as possible in this bill, and that it is done, and I keep saying this, in the most fiscally responsible way possible, wherein we can get 218 votes.
All right. Republican Congressman Andrew Clyde of Georgia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And with the speaker aiming for that full floor vote by Memorial Day, as we were just discussing, a programming note, make sure to tune into Bloomberg's exclusive conversation with the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, this coming Wednesday at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. But coming up here first, how the White House is responding to Moody's downgrade and why they're calling it a, quote, non-event. But up next, President Trump says ceasefire negotiations between Russia and Ukraine will begin immediately after a 2-hour phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. We'll discuss with former State Department official Mara Rudman, professor at the University of Virginia's Miller Center, next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We just spent 2.5 hours talking to Vladimir Putin, and I think some progress has been made. It's a terrible situation going on over there. 5,000 young people every single week are being killed. So hopefully we did something. We also spoke to the heads of most of the European nations, and we're trying to get that whole thing wrapped up.
President Trump at a Rose Garden event earlier today discussing his morning call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. For details on that call, what it means for the war in Ukraine, we turn now to Bloomberg's Nick Wadhams, who runs our national security team here in Washington. Nick, we saw the flowery readouts from both sides here. Donald Trump just there suggesting progress has been made, was it?
Well, it's a great question. We're still trying to sort through that. But I think what you need to pay attention to is what was not in the president's Truth Social post. So no mention of a timeline on when they might seek a ceasefire, just commitment to or have some sort of negotiation going on, and no mention of sanctions. European leaders had really hoped that the president would put a lot of pressure on Vladimir Putin, essentially saying, listen, get into a ceasefire or else. We've got a whole package of sanctions lined up. There's a move in Congress to impose sanctions. But instead, what you see is the president saying, listen, everything's going to go well. Another element of this is the president essentially seems to be pulling the U.S. back, saying, hey, the Vatican looks like maybe they're going to be willing to play some sort of mediating role, and saying this is something that needs to happen between Ukraine and Russia, but the U.S. isn't going to be involved in all, which is a big reversal.
Well, and we actually have President Trump speaking right now in the Oval Office, taking some questions from reporters, and he says the U.S. is not stepping back from Russia-Ukraine talks, though he notes that talks at the Vatican would be great. Let's actually listen now live here on Bloomberg TV and radio to President Trump, again, answering questions from reporters in the Oval.
We said, let's get this thing going. You know, I had many of the leaders of European nations on the line with me right after the call, and we have to get that thing solved. 5,000 young people every single week on average. And I've seen satellite pictures. You don't want to see these pictures. We'll have to see what happens. This was not my war. This is not a war that would have happened if I were president. This is not my war. I'm just here to try and help. We've spent hundreds of billions of dollars on this war, and yet that's not, frankly, we made much more than that just in 4 days in the Middle East. It's a lot of money, but we do much. This is about thousands of people dying every single week. 5,000, 6,000 people dying every single week. And just like you have the relatives here, wives and children and everything, you have, these soldiers, they say goodbye in Ukraine and in Russia, and then their parents never see them again, except maybe in pictures of horrible scenes, because I've seen some scenes, I've never seen anything like it. So we're going to see if we can get it taken care of. Yeah, please.
First off, our thanks to the members of law enforcement who are here, and our condolences to the families. We're very sorry for your loss. Mr. President, on Ukraine and on your call today that you had with President Putin, you said last week that you thought nothing was going to happen, no advances would be made until you and Putin got together. Do you still feel that way?
I think something's going to happen. It's a got very big egos involved, I tell you. Big egos involved. But I think something's going to happen. And if it doesn't, I'd just back away. And
President Trump speaking live from the Oval Office here on Bloomberg TV and radio, talking about big egos being involved in efforts toward a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, but again saying that the U.S. is not stepping back from Russia-Ukraine talks. He says if something doesn't happen, he'll back away. For more, we turn now to Mara Rudman, professor at the University of Virginia's Miller Center and former deputy envoy for the Office of the Special Envoy for Middle East Peace at the State Department. Mara, it's great to have you back on Balance of Power. Given what we just heard from the president, the suggestion that the U.S. is not, in fact, walking away, even though President Trump, in his Truth Social readout of this call with Vladimir Putin, says it's now up to Russia and Ukraine to figure this out between themselves. What is your assessment here of what role the U.S. is really intending to play?
So I think among the challenges are the way President Trump runs these diplomatic efforts or strategy for the United States is a lot of zigzags and back and forth and a fair amount of chaos. And that's the last thing that is useful in trying to reach ceasefire agreements and trying to work with challenging players, and particularly given what Russia's actions have been towards Ukraine for some period of time now. He is still talking in a very kind of both-and way about President Zelensky and Putin, and seems very reluctant to put any serious pressure on President Putin, which for all sorts of reasons does not serve United States interests, never mind the interests of Europe and of the Ukrainians.
Interesting, Mara, to read President Trump, that is, take on the meeting shortly after he went to Truth Social in a statement that became the official readout of the White House as the day progressed. He wrote, "Russia wants to do large-scale trade with the United States when this catastrophic bloodbath is over. And I agree." Was today a win for Putin?
I think every conversation he has with President Trump is certainly closer to a win than a loss. I think he has a very good read of the man he is dealing with. I find it ironic that President Trump just now in the press conference talked about big egos all around. I assume he was referring to himself as well. And Putin knows from his KGB background and others just how to read and play various figures when and as he needs to. And I think he is doing that to a fine degree, sadly, with President Trump.
Well, President Trump is continuing to answer questions from reporters in the Oval Office, just saying that we don't have boots on the ground and we wouldn't, which raises the question we keep coming back to, Mara. It's one thing to get to a ceasefire or an end to the war. It is another to maintain it. Can we even begin to grapple with that question, or does it take Russia and Ukraine deciding to actually stop the hostilities first? But how long can they really be stopped if you haven't answered that question? It seems like a chicken and the egg issue.
Yeah, that's a fair question. I think you have to be prepared as a negotiator, as a facilitator of discussions, to know what it would take to enforce them. And I think we have a number of European countries stepping up, being willing to help. I think there's been discussion of them being willing to be, but they almost certainly will need the security backstop that the United States offers. Fast as Europe is trying to move now towards frankly more independence on the defense and security front because of President Trump's actions, they're not there yet. And so part of having a successful end to the conflict does involve the United States' commitment to help to ensure the security for Ukrainians and keep Russia to its commitments. And thus far, it's very unclear that President Trump is willing to do that.
An important line from Vladimir Putin today, Mara, as he spoke with reporters following the call with Donald Trump. He said the point now is that Russia and Ukraine would find compromises. He said the main thing is to eliminate the root causes of the crisis. What is that code for? Because that sounds to me like the language he was using in the weeks leading up to the invasion, talking about the denazification of Ukraine.
Exactly, Joe. For him, root causes means having a Ukraine that is effectively not independent, that has no relationship with Europe, that has none of its own security or military force. That is not a separate and independent country. And so people should be very clear when Putin talks about root causes, that's what he's talking about. And that's why it so conflicts or contradicts any sense that this is a guy who's serious about moving towards ceasefire discussions.
Well, President Trump continues to talk about this. He says he has a red line, but he won't announce it. He doesn't want to say what that line is. Mara, do you have to make the red line clear, though, for it to be effective?
No, on this, I would actually, if I believed he actually had a red line and had a way of making sure it wasn't crossed, I would say that making it public can often be counterproductive. My concern is that President Trump is more concerned with transactions, as you indicated earlier, with things like what kind of business can he personally do with Putin, or what kinds of deals can he get for the United States, than he is about safeguarding the security of the United States, the safety and security of Europe, and most importantly, connected to that, the security and sovereignty of Ukraine.
All right, Mara Rudman, thank you so much for joining us, professor at the University of Virginia's Miller Center and former State Department official. We appreciate your time, as always. Again, President Trump is still speaking on this issue from the Oval Office. The latest headline, there could be a time for sanctions to happen. So I guess the president not taking that off the table, even as he touts the possibility of ceasefire talks between Russia and Ukraine. But we go now from geopolitics back to domestic issues, including Moody's Friday downgrade of the U.S.'s credit rating, citing large fiscal deficits. Kevin Hassett, director of the National Economic Council, responded to that earlier today.
I think that American bonds are the best buy in the world, and they're going to be even better buy once all of our policies are in place. And this downgrade is something that happened because of the runaway spending of the previous administration. They were the last agency to move, and I don't think it should be a surprise to markets.
And markets did indeed seem to shake off any surprise today. For more on that, we turn now to worldwide headquarters in New York, where we find Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick. And Romaine, we ended the day in a very different place than where we started.
Yeah, I think what you just said might be a bit of an understatement, Kaylee. I want you to go look at your Bloomberg terminal, look at the prices on your screen, because that is the financial equivalent of a shoulder shrug. Basically, a market that came into today and they were concerned about that downgrade. And we should point out, we did see a lot of activity in the overnight hours, Sunday into Monday, a big spike in Treasury yields, with the longer-term yield going above 5% and a big drop in equity prices down about 1%. But it only really took about an hour or so of trading during the cash session for all that to really be undone. A lot of dip buyers came back into this market as they saw, well, an opportunity to pick up some value. And why? Because when they look at a lot of the concerns about the deficit and the potential for maybe higher borrowing rates for the Treasury as a result of that downgrade, that seems so far off into the future for a lot of them that it just didn't matter. And there's another interesting dynamic to this, Kelly, that I want to point out. You talk about this rally that we've had in the S&P over the last few weeks, 20%. We've been up for 6 straight sessions now, and 20% since basically that big Liberation Day sell-off. Almost all of that rally has been driven by retail investors, and that was no different today. I'm going to read this stat from you, and this comes from the folks over at J.P. Morgan Chase, their team of quantitative and derivative strategists. Of the buying, of the trading volume that we saw today, 36% of that was from retail investors. That was the highest percentage of retail activity in this market in history.
So we've been trained to buy the dip. It seems, Romaine, because the news hasn't changed. The White House hasn't formally announced an actual trade deal. Some of the concerns about inflation remain, and Congress is nowhere on this bill we've been talking about. So what do you make of that?
Well, if you could dive deeper into that Moody statement, they kind of point out this idea that the effects of a lot of these trade policies and economic policies, the negative effects in their view, probably isn't going to materialize in real data until maybe September and beyond. And they made that case, and for part of the reason why they felt it was necessary to downgrade now. We've had a couple of folks come by Bloomberg Television today. Jim Milstein, who of course helps to run Guggenheim Securities as co-chairman. You also had Steve Zellin over at PJT Partners. 2 guys that actually worked on some of the restructuring back during the global financial crisis at the Treasury. They're concerned. Now, these are basically private credit guys, and they made it clear here that there is still some big concerns about rising borrowing costs, what that means for rising inflation, and, of course, what that would mean for lower economic growth. But once again, Joe, that's a longer-term story. In the short term, a lot of investors, at least on the retail side, aren't too concerned.
Just wait till we start talking about the debt limit with a more serious tone in the next couple of weeks. There's always another page to turn, as Romaine knows. He spent enough time in Washington. Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick on Wall Street, of course. Thank you, Romaine, as always. Coming up, House Republicans advanced that bill with trillions of dollars in tax cuts through a key committee late Sunday night. And we'll be talking about how Democrats are responding, whether they're playing any role in this process, with Democratic Congressman Jim Clyburn. The gentleman from South Carolina joins us next on Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew. Live from the nation's capital, this is Bloomberg TV and Radio.
It's essential that every Republican in the House and the Senate unites behind President Trump and passes this popular and essential legislative package.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt discussing President Trump's push for the one big beautiful bill, as he likes to call it, and the importance Republican lawmakers are seeing in uniting to pass this bill. Joining us now with the details on what happens next after yesterday's late-night budget committee vote that advanced the legislation is Bloomberg's Erik Wasson. Thanks for stopping down for us on a busy night on Capitol Hill, Erik. We obviously saw, as I mentioned, this bill advance, but it came with several present votes by skeptical fiscal hawks, Republicans in this case, two of whom sit on the Rules Committee. The next stop for this bill, is it possible that it will actually get to the floor this week, and what needs to change to make that happen?
It's certainly possible it will get to the floor. Speaker Mike Johnson is looking for a Thursday vote, but he's got a lot of work to do to get there. We're talking to fiscal conservatives. Bloomberg TV just had Andrew Clyde on, one of the major holdouts. I talked to him after the hit. He's looking for big changes to Medicaid that make moderates in the conference very uncomfortable. Changes to the federal matching share, changes to the federal this Medicaid provider tax situation. We've got moderates pushing back against that, talking to our colleagues even as we speak about their discomfort with any more changes to Medicaid, bringing up that work requirement from 2029 to 2027, which has been talked about. And then we have the SALT caucus. They're going to be meeting at 9 p.m. with Speaker Mike Johnson about their attempt to raise the $10,000 cap on the state and local tax deduction. There's an offer on the table from the Ways and Means Committee for a $30,000 cap for all filers, except for married filing separately. And these guys want to see that go up to $80,000 for joint filers. That's very expensive and facing a lot of pushback from conservatives. So Speaker Mike Johnson's in the middle of the maelstrom right here. He's working around the clock, has got us running, to these 1 a.m. meetings, and we'll see how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, that 1 a.m. meeting in the Rules Committee in the earliest hours of Wednesday. Is there a chance, Erik, that Chip Roy and Ralph Norman actually tank these things once again in Rules, or is the working assumption it can get through Rules? It's just a matter of the actual vote tally if and when it gets to the floor at this point for the Speaker?
The most important thing is the House floor. He can only lose 3 Republicans, and we already know Thomas Massie, who's a libertarian, has voted against the budget. He's against any form of this bill, saying it adds to the deficit, which indeed, by any reasonable measure, it does add trillions of dollars to the budget deficit, unless you use some really magic growth beans and assume high economic growth from it. So he really only lose 2 more Republicans on the floor, and there's the universe of potential defectors is really large. It's a couple of dozen at this point, at least. So that's the major question right now. How can he square this? How can he get everybody except for the handful, the 3 people, on board with this, assuming all Democrats show up and vote?
All right, Bloomberg's Erik Wasson live from Capitol Hill for us here on Bloomberg TV and Radio. We appreciate it. And for more on the Democratic response to this bill, we turn now to Democratic Congressman Jim Clyburn of South Carolina joining us here on Balance of Power. Congressman, it's so good to have you this evening. As we consider the changes the Speaker is trying to navigate here with the various factions of his party, they include bringing forward potentially stricter work requirements for Medicaid, bringing forward rollbacks to subsidies in the Inflation Reduction Act. All of that could get us closer to the midterms in 2026. Does that actually serve you and your party better in thoughts about reclaiming the House majority?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm not too sure that we are concerned about the party at this moment. We're concerned about the people that are going to be affected by all of this. I always say, if we take care of our jobs, if we take care of the American people, that will do all we need to do for us as Democrats. Now, we don't know, or at least I don't know yet, exactly what all there is to this legislation. I do know this. There is no knee-jerk opposition to work requirements. We Democrats are not opposed to work requirements if they make sense. And the problem we've got now is that people tend not to remember that we've had work requirements in these pieces of legislation for several years now. We don't oppose that. We do oppose balancing the budget on the backs of working men and women. And I don't understand how the investor class that make their money off of people spending money are so against people having money to spend. It seems to me that you would be interested in your products being afforded by the people who work in these companies and on the manufacturing places that you invest in and that you own. It's just like this Medicaid. Medicaid has beneficiaries, but the people who benefit from Medicaid are the people who own the nursing homes, the people who own these hospitals. These are the people who get the benefit. And so I just think that it's time for us to start pushing a serious narrative about who are the beneficiaries as well as who gets the benefits. And that's what we Democrats are concerned about.
Congressman, it's good to have you back. I'm sure you saw the news from Moody's on Friday. The U.S. no longer has a AAA credit rating by any of the major ratings agencies, and we've got the debt limit to deal with here. We're waiting for a more firm X date on this, but it looks like it will probably be part of this massive reconciliation project. How do you reconcile potentially voting no on this bill, knowing the debt ceiling needs to be raised?
Well, you know, I've always been one for getting rid of the debt ceiling. Ever since I've been in the Congress, over 30 years now, I've always advocated by getting rid of that. We're the only country left doing that. I think there may be one other. I shouldn't say that. I think there's one other. What we ought to do is separate that from everything else. We ought not have that as a part of this package. And so I will be voting against this bill, irrespective of the fact that they're putting things in there like raising the debt limit. Because to vote for raising the debt limit, I got to vote against people having income or being able to incur any debt at all. And so that's a fool's errand that I'm not going to go on.
Congressman, I'm sure you are familiar with the thinking of some Republicans in the Senate, including Senator Josh Hawley, for example, who is also not in favor of Medicaid cuts of any kind. President Trump suggests he doesn't really want to see Medicaid touched for eligible individuals as well. To what extent do you expect that the other chamber may actually be the one that makes sure these policies don't come to law, and that it's not just Democrats not voting for this in the House, but Senate Republicans saying no to some of these policies?
Well, I think there'll be some Senate Republicans saying no, and I think there's some House Republicans who would like to say no as well. It just so happens that people tend to put priority over whether or not they remain in this Congress or whether or not they get challenged in the primary. That's never been a priority for me. I get challenged every year, and that's fine. I'm here to do everything I possibly can to make those greatnesses, and now people tired of hearing me say this, but this is a great country. We got a great educational system. We got a great healthcare system, energy. We've got it all. The problem is all Americans can't afford it. All Americans need to be able to afford these things. And so that's what I am going to be voting for, trying to do the things that are necessary so that all Americans, irrespective of what side of town you may live on, irrespective of what zip code you exist in, whether or not you can afford to educate your children, whether or not you can afford to have health care, whether or not you can afford to pay your energy costs. These are the things we ought to be about. And to the extent that there are Republicans in the House and the Senate who would agree with this, I'm pleased to have them, and I'm pleased to be associated with them.
Congressman Clyburn, I want to ask you about former President Joe Biden's health and this terrible cancer diagnosis that we have all learned about. I know you two are close. Have you had a chance to talk with him?
I have not talked to the former president about this diagnosis. I do believe that I received calls from him last week, which I did not get. I saw this thing that I could not return a call to, and I was told on last evening those calls were coming from him. So I have not talked to him, but I do know this. I know what it is to be associated with people going through debilitating illnesses. My late wife spent 30 years fighting diabetes that led to heart failure, a stroke, total kidney failure, and I know what that's like. My father died from prostate cancer, my mother from multiple myeloma. And so these diseases that he has worked so hard to help alleviate and eliminate, to see him become a victim to one is a little bit disheartening, but I hope he will come along well, and I plan to talk with him very soon.
Well, and we extend our well wishes to the former president as well, and we're sorry for your losses, Congressman. But we just heard from President Trump in the Oval Office suggesting that somebody is not telling the facts around this diagnosis. There's dark corners of the internet where people are also questioning the timing of this announcement. And I wonder if it saddens you, sir, to see this kind of erosion of trust.
Well, trust has been eroding for a long time in this country when it comes to our governmental process. This is not anything new. I've been talking about this now for about 10 years. I just left the meeting before coming out here when I talked about the erosion of trust in our government, erosion of trust in the system, whether or not we are going to continue to work together to try to build a more perfect union, or whether or not we're going to go the way the country went back in the 1870s when we initiated that which became known as Jim Crow. I refer to Project 2025 as Jim Crow 2.0. And if you look through that project, you will see throughout those 900 pages are all kinds of things that undermine the media, undermine the government, undermine the private sector. These are just things that are eroding. And so I know that people, no matter what they see or hear these days, they're not going to believe it. So I have no idea when the cancer was first detected. I do know this, that hindsight is 20/20. I wish all of us could have the benefit of hindsight as we go through the process of making decisions about our lives and our livelihoods.
It's good to have you back with us, Congressman. Democratic Congressman Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, we thank you. Programming note, make sure to tune into Bloomberg's exclusive conversation with House Speaker Mike Johnson this Wednesday. That happens at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Coming up on Balance of Power, we'll continue the conversation on Republican lawmakers' push for this tax and spending package. We assembled our political panel. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We negotiated over the weekend. I was here all Friday, all Saturday, all Sunday until the evening, and we were negotiating with the Speaker's team, with the White House. We, I think, got some great conservative wins, and as a result, I was able to change my vote from a no to a present so that we could move this bill forward. Look, I support President Trump's agenda. I support what he's trying to do here. Nobody wants to see taxes raised on the American people. I certainly don't, but we've got to do this in a fiscally responsible way.
Republican Congressman Andrew Clyde of Georgia a bit earlier this hour talking with us about why he was one of 4 Republican lawmakers who decided to abstain from voting. He voted present to move the tax bill through the House Budget Committee. A late-night hearing, reaction now to the latest surrounding the tax and spending bill with this evening's political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, our Republican strategist, alongside Democratic analyst Jeannie Shanzano, Senior Democracy Fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Great to have you both with us here, coming in after a series of conversations, Rick, that you've been listening to with Democrats and Republicans in the House. I won't ask you if this is why you worked in the Senate. Is this bill being bogged down, or is this just par for the course?
This is pretty par for the course. I mean, look, there's a reason people don't do reconciliation every year. And yet, you know, I don't think we could actually see a appropriations process take hold with this Congress with only 3 votes. So this is the one chance they've got, and you can belittle whether or not the one big beautiful bill was the right approach, or whether John Thune's ideas of breaking it up and doing it in pieces would have gotten it further faster. But the reality is this is a very difficult process, and we're seeing it play out in real time. And the reality is no guarantees that whatever gets out of the Rules Committee is going to have the necessary votes on the floor. This thing will be negotiated down to the last vote. And it doesn't sound like, as of tonight, a lot of these members are so satisfied that they're ready to go to the floor and vote. So it could be as many as a dozen negotiations, one-on-one, individuals, calls from the president before this thing makes it out of the House. But it probably will get out of the House in some form. Okay.
Well, to that point, I don't know if we should be calling him President Trump or Majority Whip Trump, Jeannie, because he's going to the Capitol to meet with the Republican conference tomorrow. What does it signal that he thinks it's time to go give these guys a talking to, if you will?
That's right. You know, we heard the press secretary out earlier today. She is whipping this vote. And to your point, Kayleigh, the president tomorrow. By the way, I think we have to work with the House on their naming of bills. OBA is not a good name. So, you know, these acronyms, you know, One Big Beautiful Bill Act, it's not working. But the president, he understands that in the absence of Donald Trump, there is no way this gets through. And Mike Johnson is telling members that it's going to be humiliating and embarrassing if we don't get this out before Memorial Day like we planned. I'm not sure how far that message is going to go, but the one thing that has worked, and the only thing that has worked, is pressure from Donald Trump. So I think he came back from his trip in the Middle East. He's going right to Capitol Hill tomorrow to whip this vote because, of course, he's looking at the Moody's downgrade. He is looking at a debt that is skyrocketing. He knows that if he doesn't get this part of his economic plan through in addition to the tariffs that he's working on, then that is going to be a real loss for him. So he is doing the right thing going down there. The question is the pressure going to be enough?
But, Rick, we keep hearing the Senate's going to rip this thing up, make a bunch of changes, send it back to the House. And I'm guessing it's going to be the same people, the Chip Roys, Ralph Normans, and so on, who don't like what they see there. So do we go through this all over again?
Yeah, based on what the senators, Republican senators are saying, the deficit hawks aren't going to be happy with what they get back from the Senate. They'll be much less dedicated to the discipline of cutting. You already have a $3 trillion add-on to the deficit over the next 10 years based on the plans that the House wants to do. Yeah. And the Senate's just not going to go for all these Medicaid cuts. So this is the beginning stages of the reconciliation process. It's not the end. And we're going to spend a lot of time over the next 3 months hearing about various ways to try and get something to the president's desk. Ultimately, it's too soon to tell, but it won't be the bill they pass out of the House.
Rick's talking in months, Jeannie. The president wants this on his desk within 6 weeks. They keep talking about this being done by July 4th. Should we just rule that out entirely at this point?
I think so. You know, the one thing they do have is the debt ceiling coming up that's going to force their hand to a certain extent. But yeah, the president is going to want to be holding his ears if he's listening to Rick Davis right now, which I'm sure he is. They want this through. And let's not forget, you know, this is the height of irresponsibility, continuing a trend of irresponsibility on both sides of the aisle. We are running an enormous debt and deficit, and that is one thing that the hawks are right about. Now, their solutions are not the ones I would offer, but we have to do a better job budgeting in this country, and this bill does not get there because the math doesn't add up. And I give Donald Trump credit for at least offering the idea of raising taxes that fell flat, but something needs to be done here because we are spending $1 out of every $7 paying off the interest on this debt, and that's only going to get worse if this bill passes.
All right, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, our political panel on this Monday. Thank you both so much for joining us. And coming up, Elon Musk is sitting down with Bloomberg tomorrow. We'll preview that interview and a vote that's happening in the Senate tonight, unrelated to reconciliation, but important for our audience if you care about crypto. We'll have more next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
In the United States, stable coins have operated in a legal gray zone. There are no clear rules of the road to follow. Fortunately, the Genius Act addresses these problems by providing a clear regulatory framework for stablecoins, a framework that will protect consumers and our national security while helping to keep the United States at the forefront of financial innovation.
That was Senate Majority Leader John Thune this afternoon, announcing the Senate will consider the Genius Act tonight after a delay earlier this month. The bipartisan bill aims to provide a regulatory framework for the use of stablecoins in the U.S. And, of course, on the first attempt, there were Democrats who essentially wouldn't allow this to go forward over concern around anti-money laundering mechanisms specifically. But they're going to see if they've been able to work out a deal and actually get the requisite votes to move this forward.
Well, you've been covering this since you got to town a couple of years ago. Democrats have oscillated quite a bit depending on who's in control and the direction of the legislation. Can we really call this bipartisan, or do we have to wait?
Well, Gillibrand's a co-sponsor, so I think that does make it bipartisan, but we'll see how this vote shakes out. A programming note, tomorrow Elon Musk will be talking to Bloomberg. Tune into that at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, and we'll see you back here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.